I thank you very much indeed, Mr. Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Council, colleagues and friends. It's troubling to recall that it was only in March this year that the Council could begin to look forward to the outcomes of what would have been the United Nations-led national conference aimed at supporting a Libya-led transition towards a sustainable, stable, unified, representative and effective governance structure under the framework of the Libyan political agreement. But in September, change came very quickly. 2 weeks after the close of the Council's March session, an offensive against Tripoli, launched by the forces of the Libyan National Army under the command of General Khalifa Haftar, brought all attempts to stop the violence and to resume the political process to a standstill that is yet to be overcome successfully. It is against the backdrop of this military stalemate and political paralysis, a deepening humanitarian crisis, unrelieved suffering of people in Libya, and grave fears of return to full-scale civil war, that this oral update is provided to you. Since our last update to the Council, the conflict has killed at least 218 civilians and injured 289 more. Over 300,000 people have been displaced internally, while another 400,000 persons must now go about their daily lives within only 1 to 3 kilometres of the clashes in Tripoli. But the conflict, of course, has spread beyond Tripoli, with increasingly lethal consequences for civilians. It is deeply troubling that since April of this year, at least 46 attacks have been directed against civilian objects, including specifically health workers and health facilities. Further, on the 10th of August, an attack on an UNSMIL convoy in Benghazi caused the death of 3 United Nations staff members, caused the injury of 10 civilians, including a 4-year-old child, and 2 United Nations staff members, one of whom was a member of our own human rights team. At this juncture, I pause to pay solemn tribute to those colleagues who paid the highest possible price for their service to the people of Libya, and express the High Commissioner's deepest solidarities with the families of those who lost their lives and to those who were injured and who still are recovering from their wounds. Mr. Vice President, intentional targeting of civilians and civilian objects, as well as indiscriminate attacks, may amount to war crimes. Crimes of such gravity cannot pass unpunished. Those responsible must be identified and held accountable. Excellencies, serious human rights violations are widespread in Libya, including summary executions, abductions, enforced disappearances, torture and ill treatment, gender-based violence, including conflict-related sexual violence. Thousands of women, men and children languish in prolonged arbitrary detention, sometimes held in incommunicado and without the opportunity to challenge the legality of their detention. We continue to receive reports of ill treatment and torture of detainees, including denial of medical care and of sexual health services. In sum, no improvement has been observed since our report on detention in Libya was published in April last year. We are also concerned by the heightened risks confronting human rights defenders and activists, as is illustrated by the abduction of Member of Parliament Shiham Segwa on the 17th of July this year. She was abducted from her home in Benghazi a few hours after having openly criticised the offensive of the Libya National Army in Tripoli, which she did on a TV channel. Her son also was beaten and her husband badly injured, and her fate remains unknown. Excellencies, in March, the Assistant Secretary-General for Human Rights reported to this Council on the serious human rights violations and abuses suffered by migrants in Libya. That parlous treatment continues, and despite escalation of the conflict, still migrants intercepted at sea are returned to that country at the hands of the Libyan Coast Guard. There they are rendered to both official and unofficial detention centres, already overcrowded facilities, lacking proper ventilation, appropriate sanitation facilities, lacking adequate food, safe drinking water, and without appropriate health care. There they are subjected not only to indefinite arbitrary detention, but also to grave human rights violations such as torture and ill treatment, extortion, sexual abuse and exploitation, trafficking and smuggling. Many migrants today are exposed also further to the impacts of the conflict. Today, of the 4,900 migrants detained in inhumane conditions in Libya, 3,500 are held in detention centres located in conflict zones, many of those being located in or next to militia compounds or ammunition stores. 1 in 5 of those so detained is a child. Excellencies, on the 2nd of July, it was a second airstrike against a detention centre hosting 600 migrants in Tajura that saw the deaths of 53 people and the injury of 87. Yet, all parties to the conflict knew full well the coordinates of that detention facility, knew full well that it housed only civilians. We have repeatedly called for the closure of all immigration detention centres in Libya and for full access to humanitarian protection, collective shelters and other safe places for migrants. We therefore welcome warmly the decision taken on the 1st of August by the Interior Ministry to close 3 detention centres in Misrata, Tajura and Khoms. This decision needs to be implemented urgently, conclusively, and we encourage the authorities to engage with the contingency plan to progressively close all detention centres across Libya. Mr. Vice President, a dignified human rights-based solution for migrants stranded in Libya is not only a moral and collective responsibility of states, it is an obligation under international law. The closure of detention centres in Libya must be accompanied by such solutions, including timely and safe disembarkation of all migrants rescued in the Mediterranean and the provision of shelter and protection outside Libya in compliance with the principle of non-refoulement. Restrictions on life-saving work of humanitarian search and rescue organisations should be lifted. Mr. Vice President, I conclude by emphasising that there will be no respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms in Libya without an end to the conflict, but there will be no sustained end to the conflict without a commitment by authorities to fulfil, protect and respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. Therefore, we reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire. We appeal to all states to support the plan proposed by the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary-General in Libya to restore peace and stability in the country and end widespread impunity for human rights violations committed there, and to do so as a deterrent that can help promote prevention of further violations. The High Commissioner strongly supports establishment of an international body mandated to investigate the full range of violations of international human rights and humanitarian law in Libya, and stands ready to fully play her role and the role of her office in support of its work. I thank you very much.
Thank you.